Yeah, so I mean, we have an international audience, and just before geography, I always like to ask our guests where they were born and raised.
Well, first of all, Namdi, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to talk to your fan base and your subscribers. I was born in a little small town in Alabama in the
Oh,
U.S., Gadsden, Alabama, the deep, deep South. Back in the 50s, 1952, I just literally on January 9th celebrated my 70th birthday.
wow,
Uh,
happy
and
birthday.
so I grew up during the heart of segregation with our governor, George Wallace, who
Yeah,
is fairly well known for being a segregationist. And it was tough times. I integrated. I didn't go to black schools. I only went to white schools, and that was very, very, very tough. Um, we're talking the 50s and 60s. So
wow.
that's my humble beginnings in a little small rural town. We had a dirt road that
Wow.
one of our homes, my first home, with an outhouse that they called in the day. So it was a very rural community in Alabama when I first, as I was growing up, it changed, but
Yeah.
in the very beginning.
How far is that from Selma, Alabama?
It's a I say 2.5 hour drive. Um,
Okay.
but my mother grew up in Marion, Alabama, which is literally 8 miles away from
Okay.
Selma. The correlation between Marion is many. My mother went to high school with Coretta King.
Wow.
Uh, Also, Andrew Young's wife also was in that class. Uh,
Wow.
because of the distance from
Yeah.
Marion to Selma. I'm sure that's where Dr. King met his wife.
Yeah.
And so when my mother left Marion, Alabama, and went to Gaston, Alabama, she continued a torch of integration and desegregation.
Wow. And the reason I asked because even though I was born in the UK, I went to college in Selma, Concordia College in Selma, Alabama, and in '92. And I didn't. What was a surprise to me when I moved there was that Mayor Smitherman, who was the mayor during the march in '69, was still the mayor when I went there in '92. And when I heard that,
Wow,
yeah, he was still mayor
that's
up
amazing.
to, yeah, he was still mayor up to I think '95, and then yeah. So I just that history, and I tell everyone I spent 10 years in the U.S., but I loved this Alabama because I felt that, and I experiences are different, but I felt compared to when I moved to the Midwest, and that I felt more the genuine sort of hospitality of being in the South compared to when I was in the Midwest, where I'd never understood how people felt about me.
Yeah,
Um,
the thing about the South is that they're blatantly honest and
yeah, that was it.
transparent,
Yeah,
but just have big hearts
yeah,
and warmth and love that they share to a fellow man.
yeah,
And Alabama has changed tremendously from the times I grew up as a kid. Uh,
yeah.
the times of having colored and white uh, water fountains and
Wow.
bathrooms and sitting rooms and restaurants you couldn't go inside of. It's changed drastically. I haven't been to Marion in many, many years, but I'm going to make a point uh, this year or next to go to Marion, and I certainly go to Selma because, again, it's only across the bridge there, you're into Marion.
Yeah.
So it's not far at all.
So, I mean, I think what is interesting for those of us who are from international, who would have only watched the sort of things like segregation on TV and films, when you're that young and seeing that, what does that do for your sort of career aspirations and vision as to what you want to be when what you're seeing is pretty much because of your color of your skin, you're in your own country regarded as second class? How does that change how you saw your future?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, Andy, because fortunately for me, I had great parents who instilled in me to always dream,
Mm,
who instilled in me to be the very best. And that experience of being the only Black in some cases, or one of the few Blacks in school. Actually, it was very challenging. A lot of battle scars around that. Had to go to therapy, actually, for the trauma of that for many years. But it also gave me a sense of I could accomplish, regardless of the circumstances. If I worked hard and built relationships, it also allowed me to understand a culture. Because I think when we look at race, and especially in America, but all over the world, culturally, we're different. And how we approach problem solving, how we approach family, how we approach music, culturally is different. And I got a sense of white culture by going to these schools that actually became a benefit to me later on in corporate America and as an entrepreneur, of understanding white culture, because that's mainly who I interface more with. And since then, I'm making a point to understand Asian culture, to understand African culture, although that there's so many different tribes of Africa. Makes it somewhat difficult sometimes, but a general sense. But that really instilled that confidence, that understanding of culture, understanding of self, by being in those situations. And they were tough. I've been beaten, I've been spit on, I've been electric prodded in demonstrations. And many other people that you would never know the names of. That put in some serious sacrifices so that you and I could have this opportunity to have this conversation today.
Yeah, as I said, many of us when understand it, and I think the one thing I realized when I moved to the States is that some of the kids that I went to college with, they had the stories of their parents and their grandparents still fresh. So it meant that they had a very different outlook to society than I did. Because even though I was born in the UK, but I knew my heritage back in Nigeria and my grandparents. And so I went with a sense of identity. And I noticed in college, some of my classmates would say, you know what, we're not going to make it because the segregation and all the stuff is hidden and still there. And I couldn't see the same thing, but I was able to, as later on, become more empathetic to understand that if my dad was telling me all these stories and my grandparents, I might still think it's so live and fresh. But then I do wonder then, how do you remain focused, to finish school and then even think about college in the midst of how things had been?
Well, two things. One thing that you said that really resonated to me is your friend saying that you're not going to make it because. And a lot of us, and a lot of people that's watching right now, be mindful that if you believe that you're not going to make it because, and we can fill in the blank because I'm Black, because I'm poor, whatever the because is, there's probably a significant chance that you're not going to make it. The brain is very, very powerful. And if you program it that you're not going to make it, it would give you information out that you're not going to make. So it really starts with believing in oneself and understanding what is the passion. That's the key word for me, that fuels us, that allows us to have those work ethics because we love what we're doing in a very strong, powerful way. So it's finding out that passion. And for me, I became a basketball star. And so, when I was at junior high school, with 6 Black kids, and it was about 1,000 white kids. And the basketball coach, because I was tall, and Black, just assumed he can play basketball. Well, I couldn't play basketball. I was the kid, Namdi, that was the last picked on the team always. I was not coordinated. I was so skinny. I was so skinny. And so I was the last to make the team, but I continued to work at it and work at it, work at it. And then I began to really enjoy and love it. So sometimes when we're exposed to something new, we might find out that we really love it. And then I began to work harder and got older and more coordinated and continued to work harder and became a basketball star by the time I was a senior in high school and had many scholarships to college.
Wow.
And actually went to the University of Tennessee, where again, I played another role of integrating the University of Tennessee, the Chattanooga branch. So that's how I got to college, was having these scholarships. My parents were poor. They would not have had the finances to pay for me to go to college, but I was fortunate to have many, many opportunities to go to college and took advantage of that.
Wow. So during that time then, and I think partly just getting a sense of music that was around, what kind of music were you listening to and sort of inspired by?
Well, my dad was about 6'4" and he weighed about 400 pounds. He was
Wow.
and very little fat, just real muscle. You would think he couldn't dance, but he was an amazing dancer.
Wow.
And so, as in most Black families in the South, on Sundays, we had Sunday dinner. And after dinner, my mom and dad would go into the living room, which was forbidden for us kids. They had plastic on the plastic on the sofas, and no way would you able to go in the living room. And also in the dining room, near the dining room table, they had a record player. And my dad, he loves blues. He loved it. He loved R&B. And he would ask me to put on the music while he danced. And then we had vinyl, and the vinyl, they were old and they had scratches in them. And he would give me a nickel, a dime, and a quarter to put on top of the needle, because he would get annoyed if it was a scratch while he was dancing and get him off beat. He would get really annoyed. So in that process, it allowed me to begin to understand playlists and to understand the mood of my dad. Was he happy today? Was he down? And at a certain point, he trusted me just to play the music. And so I began to play all sorts of music. He loved jazz, he loved gospel, he loved R&B. He actually loved country. And a lot of people back in those days, Blacks in the South, loved country music as well. But when I look back, I was a DJ, and I had my own playlist.
Oh my goodness. But when you got to college, so if you're thinking about in the college times, did you then, when you were a little bit more independent, what music then did you start to listen to? When I got to college, there was two genres that I listened to. I listened to jazz, and I listened to R&B, and rap music just came into the fray, and so it was just starting up. But a lot of jazz, a lot of R&B, and we had so many great artists in R&B back then, and so many great groups, OJ's, Earth, Wind and Fire. I can go on and on, Four Tops, and all the girl groups. And it was so much quality music back then. And a friend of mine, a fraternity brother, he was a general manager of a college radio station and used to hang out there. And we used to sit back and say, one day, he would say, I'm going to put together the greatest girl group ever. And I'll say, no, man, I'm going to put together the greatest girl group ever. What are you talking about? So he went on. Seriously, that's why I say the brain is so powerful. This is in 1973. We're talking about we're going to put together the greatest girl groups ever. He went on to found and put together En Vogue, and I went on to find and put together Destiny's Child. Oh, Who, who's,
David
who's,
Lombard. David
okay,
Lombard is his name.
wow. But why girl groups at that time then? Because apart from the Supremes but were there not many girl groups that you
Oh,
thought about
there,
girl groups?
groups in general were the norm back then. You had
Okay.
so many girl groups and so many Patti LaBelle, the LaBelles. I mean,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
you could go on and on. And we used to play even with the kids. We used to play games of who can name the most groups. And even now, I mean, about a year ago, I played that game. Who can name? It was about 40 guy bands and about boy bands and about 27 girl groups. I mean, it's like lots and lots of in
Wow.
the 70s. 70s, I think, for me was the best era of music in America.
Okay. Okay. More so than the Motown times of the 60s?
Yes, the Motown spilled over into the 70s.
Yeah.
So they were part of the 70s. But you had all of these other really major bands, and
Okay.
dance music was coming into the fray as well. And it was just plentiful. Any given evening, I went to school in the University of Tennessee, but then I transferred my junior year and went to Fisk in Nashville, Tennessee. And
Wow.
that's, that's Music City is the tagline for Nashville. Any night in Nashville, you can go to 10, 15, 20 bars, restaurants with live music. Probably more than that any given night if you had the time. So
Yeah.
music has always been a mainstay in my life. I've always had significant love for music.
But then when you were, so you go to Fix, what were you thinking that you wanted to do after college?
I always knew, even when I was a kid. Uh, as a kid, my parents, although they had daytime jobs, my mom was a colored maid. My mom made $3 a day as a colored maid. My dad was a truck driver. He made $30 a week. But he convinced the people he worked for to use the truck and would tear down little houses and sell all of the materials, the wood and the copper. My mother, as a colored maid, was get the white woman she worked for to give her all the hand-me-down clothes, ask her to ask her neighbors. And then on the weekend, my mother would make these beautiful quilts with two of her best friends. But they always instilled, and my grandfather was an entrepreneur. My parents were entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship has been a part of our family heritage. And
Wow.
so they always instilled in me entrepreneurship.
So they even so when you were in college, then in your mind you were thinking, okay, I'm not going to go to get a 9 to 5. You were still thinking about the girl group, or was that a vision that you were seeing and you were aiming towards?
In college, yeah, we used to sit and think about it. After college, then I knew that I wanted to be a businessman and entrepreneurship. My undergraduate degree was in business administration
Yeah.
and economics. So I took the role and the route of sales and marketing. Um,
Okay.
and then, as you know, I'm a college professor.
Yeah.
Most people aren't aware that there's two terms. There's entrepreneurship and there's intrapreneurship. Intrapreneurship is when you run an organization, you work inside of an organization, but you run your department of your territory. You run it as if you own it. It's a headset that comes with entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship. It's a way you think about things, and you take ownership of it as if it's yours. And so I went into sales and marketing and did corporate America for 20 years and was extremely successful at it, and took a lot of skills. And I always say that my first job in corporate America was with Xerox Corporation in the 70s and 80s, when they were like the top corporation to work in, especially for Blacks. But
Wow.
the skills that I learned, I always say skills are transferable. I transferred those skills when I was in the beauty business, when I was in the apparel business with House of Darion and Darion, when I was in the music business, and now I'm in the film and TV business. I transferred those skills. Now, I have to understand the culture of the organization, because every organization has its own culture, their definitions, the way people dress, the way people speak. And it's important that we learn the culture as also, but it's also important that we get the knowledge, because the knowledge is power. So you had no idea this interview, because you thought I was just Beyonce dad.
No, no, no. You know,
Most people do though.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that sets me apart is that I focus on the journey of the who I'm. Even if you were part of, say, Jodeci's stuff, I don't focus on the music as much as the journey, because that's the parts that we never get to hear and that we can actually learn from. Because what I wanted to find out was the experience you had in the Deep South with the segregation, and you're now working in corporate America. Others might start to, if they had any disagreements, they could start to see the same colored lines in their work. But how were you able to, because you did mention that you started to learn and culture and use it to form relationship. And I think that's one of the most powerful things I heard was about, you said about learning the culture to network and relationships. But how easy was that to not feel scarred and not feel bitter, and to take that sense of, well, I'm going to work with you for my long-term benefit?
Well, because again, I grew up and gone to white schools, right? So
Yeah.
I understood white culture. I'm very open about Black, white, and various cultures. A lot of people like to use words that disguise it. I'm not. I'm just plain and simple. There's a difference in Black and white in our cultures, and I learned a lot of that growing up in Alabama. But I'll use an example. So how I got my job at Xerox is really interesting, because, back then on Fridays, a bunch of guys that were working, and I was working at a Pitney Bowes company that sold mailing equipment. And we were just having happy hour. That was a big thing on Friday. A bunch of guys get together, have cocktails. And there was a guy sitting next to our table listening the whole time, and we didn't know it. Lesson one, you never know who's listening, right? Lesson one. So he comes over and he says, "May I have a word with you?" He picked me out of about 12 guys. And he says, "I've been listening to you guys, and I'm really, really fascinated." He says, "But I'm really fascinated by you, listening to you and your leadership and how you're communicating. I'd like to offer you a job at Xerox."
Wow.
Well, that would be like getting somebody saying, "I'm giving you a record deal at Sony." You're like, "What? Huh?"
Yeah.
So I got that position and did very well selling copiers, which Xerox was noted for. But there was a position that became available in the medical division of Xerox. Now, this was the elite, all-white, affluent division of Xerox. We're talking early, as a matter of fact, 1980. And people there were making $200,000-$300,000 a year in 1980. And they were selling diagnostic imaging equipment.
Oh, yeah.
So I went to the branch manager and I said, "May I interview for that position?" Because I found out about it. He laughed. He was like, "Oh, go ahead, Knowles. It'd be great experience for you." Great experience for you. And I said, "Well, thank you. Thank you." A month later, I interviewed and I got the job. And nobody could believe it. Well, in that year and a half, I had been the top sales rep every quarter, but that's not why. Everyone else that interviewed went in there, interview talking about, well, I've been at Xerox 15 years. I've been at Xerox 20 years. What I did that was different, I went to the library for a month because the equipment that we sold was the leading modality for breast cancer detection called zero radiography. And what I did that none other did, that other candidates, I learned terminology, I learned the marketplace. So when I went in my interview, I wasn't talking about how great I was at Xerox, because I'd only been there for a year and a half. I talked about the marketplace and I talked about breast cancer. And that really impressed the manager. I mean, he hired me because of that.
Wow. Yeah, people talk about don't dress how you are, but dress for how you want to be, and that sense of the vision, and I think that's the one thing that people can use your trials, as a battleground to learn how to overcome, as opposed to saying, well, I'll never get it, so there's no point. Because when your manager said that, go for the experience, is that what then said, well, let me do this? Or was that something that even if he had said you can do it, you'd still would have gone to the library, you still would have done the studying?
You can have vision all day long and you can have goals and dreams. If you don't put in the work, it's called a hobby. Yeah. A lot of people want to get in the music industry, but they don't want to learn. And they fail. 99% of people that try to get in the music industry, as you know, fail it because they don't want to put the work in. If I told your listeners right now to go to Point Blank Music School, which is a London school, but there's one in Los Angeles, but I teach it online. If I said to your listeners right now, less than 1% of 1% would actually end up applying because they don't want to put the work in. And that's the number one reason for failure. People don't want to learn. They don't want to grow. They don't want to put the work in. So I believe that you have to have passion first, and then you have to have a vision. But with passion come work ethics. When you find someone who's passionate about something, they work hard at it because they love it. It's not work. What coexists with passion is work ethics. So that, and if I had said when my manager said, you're not going to get it, it'd be great experience, I didn't allow my brain to say that.
Yeah.
I let him say it, but that brushed right off of me. I don't think that way. I don't think I can't. I don't focus on what I can't do. I focus on what I can do. And if I'm going to do it, I want to do it at an exceptional level. And I tell everyone the first day of class, if you want to just be good at it, don't come back. I'd say that I've been teaching now for 17 years. First day of class, regardless if it's entrepreneurship, music business, or sales marketing, I don't want anybody around me in my class that just want to be good. I just want people that want to be exceptional and great. That's the level that I work on all the time. I don't want to give you a good interview. I want at the end of this interview, people say, that's one of the best interviews I ever heard.
Yeah.
So you prepare. You prepare for them. You research who you're going to interview with. You research what the goal of the programming, what the ethos is of the programming, so that you can understand it. You don't just show up for an interview. If you want to be great at it, you do. If you just want to give a good interview, you just, oh, who's my next interview? But if you want to be great, you do some research on it.
And that's an important lesson. That's because naturally there's a lot of us who naturally have skills. Athletes would naturally have skills, but you notice the ones who, like what separates, say, Michael Jordan from the rest is what you do behind the scenes, and that sense of drive and work, not just showing up. And I think a lot of us sometimes think, oh, we've got the vision, and we use our natural charismatic personality in the interview, and we'll probably get it. But then you wonder when somebody else comes in, as you said, and says, look, forget just what I've done before. this is where we need to be going. And I think that's something that I really would hope that we're all going to pick up from. Um, did you coming away from that, then did you then still think, you know, after you were successful at Xerox, were you comfortable, or did you still have that sense of being my own boss eventually, and outside of corporate America?
So while I was at Xerox, I was there for 10 years, from 78 to 88. And in the medical division, I was there for 8 years of those 10 years. In the medical division, I was fortunate enough in selling copiers. I was always, in Houston, one of the top salesperson every quarter. When I got to the medical division, I was fortunate to be several years the #1 sales rep worldwide.
Wow.
So imagine what that means, being the top sales rep worldwide. But during that period, my former wife, who's an amazing woman, Tina, you know, she had stayed at home and raised the kids, and she was bored of that. And I asked her one day what was her passion. And I knew the answer. She loved doing hair and making women beautiful. And I said, Tina, you go to school and get your cosmetology license. When you graduate, you and I will start a hair salon. So around 83, we opened, and I'm still at Xerox, so I'm at corporate America, but we also opened a major hair salon that became the #1 hair salon in Houston. We owned it for 17 years. But get this, Namdi, in let's say 1987, we made our first $1 million in 1987 with that hair salon in Houston. I mean, it was a major, at one point we had a staff of 25 people. So we're talking a major operation. So that was really my first major entree into entrepreneurship. You have to remember, when I was a kid in elementary school, I sold candy, went to a Catholic school, got in trouble with the nuns for doing that. When I was in junior high, I started a business, a salon service, me and 2 other kids mowing lawns. So I always had that entrepreneurial spirit. That again, generationally, on the Knowles side of the family, has been passed down.
So now, and a lot of people might think, how do you then not get comfortable? Because if you have you know, you're still top sales executive at Xerox, now you've got a family business that's generated over $1 million. How do you then not get comfortable saying, well, this is the good life and let's just relax, and still press on for more, but not like, you know, more money, but just more success and more growth?
Well, I think you have to understand the passion of the creative process was my former wife. I'm not a stylist. I'm not, you know, that's not my skill set is business, on how to message, how to market, how to sell, how to come up with systems, which is, again, transferable. I just transferred what I learned at Xerox into the hair salon. So it wasn't very difficult to me. I had the time because I covered 5 states in America. I covered Texas, Oklahoma, Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi. So it wasn't like a day job every day I'm at an office. You know, I worked out of my home. I had the flexibility of my time management. So I had the opportunity to do that. And I did the business side, and my former wife did the creative side. And she did an extremely great job of that, similar to she did the imaging of Destiny Shaw. My former wife did that. I didn't get involved with the imaging part. My areas, I focus on where my passion and love is, and that is the business side.
Business side. And so, well, I guess we've spoken about the music side, and then I do wonder then how the getting into the music industry, how did that door open for you?
Well, when I left Xerox, I then had the opportunity to be the first Black in America to sell MRI and CT scanners. Any of you know MRI and CTs, that's a very sophisticated tool. I had the opportunity to sell the first generation. So when you sell first generation diagnostic imaging, you then have to be extremely scientific in explaining the technology. You can't just go in with sales skills. You have to also learn the technology. So I had to work extremely hard. That wasn't a skill set that I just instantly had. I had to work hard on learning the technology and being able to message and explain it. And then I left because once you're successful in the medical, in most places, you get all of these companies coming after you that want you to work there. And so then I went to Johnson & Johnson. I was with Philips Medical Systems based in Eindhoven. And then I went to Johnson & Johnson as a neurosurgical specialist. And then this thing called managed care happened in America, where you had to look at the cost of procedure, the cost of medication, the cost of operating costs. And the neurosurgeon called me into his office and told me he couldn't use my instruments anymore because of the cost and because he was mandated by the hospital to reduce his costs per procedure. I called my former wife and said I couldn't do this anymore. Now, what I'm about to say is important because many of us in life will get to a defining moment when we say, I don't want to do this anymore. What's important for you to know is you don't just instantly jump ship. You transition. That moment, I knew I didn't want to do it anymore, but I knew I would transition into the music industry, not jump ship. And I picked the music industry because now you know my background. You understand why when I had to transition and thought about what do Mathew Knowles want to do in his life now, that music would be a part of it. Although Beyonce was just beginning in music, but music had always been a foundation of my life. And so that transition, went back to college, took courses, music management, music production, publishing, went to every seminar in America that I could get to. Also to build relationships, which is critically important, especially in the music industry. Most people think that, I left to work with Beyonce. That's partly true, but not the majority true. The first artist that I signed and got a record deal was not Destiny's Child. There's a rapper named Lil O with MCA Records. If you know your history of music, you know MCA Records in the 90s was the number one urban record label to work for. They had Jodeci, they had Puffy, they had Mary J. Blige, they had Heavy D.
New Edition, Jody Watley.
New Edition. So to get that was my first record deal that I got for an artist. The second record deal I got was Destiny's Child with Sony. So people don't really know the history. And that's why I do these type of interviews is, if you said, I want to talk about Destiny's Child, I would have said, not interested. Look out for the documentary. That's what I would have said. But if I enjoy just bringing awareness to my life and the steps and decision making and the failures and successes.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is really key that you mentioned was the getting the knowledge before you go in, because the going to the seminars, doing your research, going and getting upskilling yourself before moving into an industry like the music industry, where we have spoken to lots of artists from the 90s who have also had the same experience of giving contracts, signing away their publishing, and ending up broke without recognizing or knowing anything. And and they'll always say, look, we came from the hood, we didn't know anything, and we were given this opportunity, and then we trusted the lawyers and everyone, but the money disappeared. But you said you transitioned, so it's like, well, let me upskill myself because I need to understand what I'm dealing with, especially with the publishing. Did you think that the more you knew about the business side and things, did you find that the industry were less hesitant to deal with you because they think, well, he knows a little too much from the outside, or how did you
No, it was just the
maneuver
opposite. It was actually just the opposite.
Oh,
There's a thing in the music industry that parents are just viewed in a different way. They're not viewed in a positive light for the most case. And I understand it because I ran a record label for years. And the thoughts are that parents get very, very emotional. And in many cases, that's correct. Many cases. One of my life lessons and one of the things that I teach in the classroom is he who gets emotional will make poor decisions.
mm,
And so, when I got into the music industry, you had the Brandy mother, you had Usher's mother, you had Joe Jackson, you had parents, that had major artists. So there was a perception rather, of these parents as being not knowledgeable, being, again, emotional and troublemakers. And so that was what was thought. Many times I never even said I was Beyonce's father. I just said I was the manager of Destiny's Child, so that perception wouldn't enter into someone's mind, but look at my performance. Now, in the music industry, there's something amazing that happens. Once you're successful, then everybody says you're a genius. And everybody wants to do the way you did. And so I went through that process, and then people began to say, wow, why didn't we do it that way? Because I went into the music industry where record labels selling records. I went into it I'm in the branding and endorsement and sales business. I'm not in the record business because I want my artists to be way more than just music. Music will be the conduit, the foundation of the brand, but we will take the brand outside of music once we built our core audience, because the core audience is critical, and you have to have expertise in knowing how to define and know your core audience. But once you have built that, then I can sell you a clothing line. I can sell you movies. I can sell you dolls. I can sell you these other things that continue to build the brand and at the same time bring financial reward.
so you'd already thought that way, because a lot of times, a lot of the executives or artists is after they've been successful, they start to get offers for stuff. But then, when someone's bringing stuff, you don't really have, if it's not on your radar, you don't really have sort of the control of what it is. But you're saying that you went in thinking about branding and everything more so than just how many records we're going to be selling.
Records was the core business. And it's from records. That's why when I hear artists say, oh, I hate the record label, they make all the money. Well, first of all, they gave you a loan. And so you wouldn't even be here talking had they not given you the loan, called an advance. It's really, when there's advance, you got to pay it back. But understanding that when you understand the record industry, you understand that artists seldom are going to make money selling records. How it's been designed from day one is the record industry, and rightfully so. If I invest in Apple, I want to get my money back, right?
Yeah.
And so that core audience, though, that the record label helped build, now I can go sell them other things. Now I can go market other things. Now I can go market my live touring, and I can market radio, television and movies and dolls and toys and computer games and merchandise and all sorts of things. But I understood that going into it because I came from corporate America. So I had a different headset.
I remember, yeah, because I remember how I interviewed Don Robinson from In Vogue, but even Donnell Jones, and he says that, yeah, he didn't think he ever made any money from the face, but he made all his money as because he was a writer and he owned almost 75% of his publishing and the touring. And it's almost as if most artists, unless they do the diamonds, get to sell 10 million plus albums, very rarely see the money, but they also assume that the labels were the bad people and their managers and stuff. But it was very interesting that you had a very different perspective that, look, they're giving you a loan, they're investing in you. If you don't do well, then they lose the money. But, how do you take advantage of the opening and opportunity they've given you?
And that's why one of the reasons I think I succeeded is because presidents of Columbia Records, they loved me because I wanted them to win. We were in a partnership. I understood it. And by the way, when I talked about all of the revenue streams, I left out the publishing. Back then, we were selling CDs. And so if you wrote on the song, then you got paid on the manufacturing, not the sales. When they manufacture it, because intellectual property works that way. It's a little different now that we're in the streaming world. So also, if you're a songwriter, you made a significant amount of money. And it's only fair that if they put up the money to get this started and invest, that they get their money back and that they made a significant return on their investment. That's how business works. And so when you see artists and managers that have this hate relationship, they don't understand it. Immediately they don't understand it because they haven't gotten the knowledge to understand how this works.
Knowing about the publishing side, did you then encourage the artists you had signed, Beyonce and the rest, to get into writing, because that is a revenue stream that is important to hold on to and to develop that side?
What I encouraged, and again, transitional, I encouraged them on the first times they were in the studio to learn as much as they could. They weren't ready yet to write songs. Learn the process. Have your eyes and ears wide open to learn the process of songwriting. Because it shouldn't be, I'm doing this because I want to make money. It should be, you're going to hear over and over from me, knowledge is power. You do it because you understand the process. And that's what makes you great at it. So initially, on the first album, Destiny's Child didn't write any songs on the first album of Destiny's Child, but they learned the process. So on the second album, they wrote more. They learned the process. Now they're producing and in the studio, and they're now producers as well as songwriters, understanding the process, constantly growing, gathering and gaining more knowledge. That's what makes greatness.
Yeah. The other part of it, though, is talent. You can't replace talent. That's, because learning, like Michael Jackson, I always will remember that they said when he was 5 and 6, Barry Gordy said that he'll just be in the studio watching and learning, and when everyone else is playing, he'll just be learning everything. So it was no surprise that he was both an excellent businessman, but also just how he took off with his career, and how you then, in a way, directed your first Destiny's Child to sort of learn and follow and learn and not just rely on just the fame. Was it a battle at all? Because I don't know, because when I have no, we're on this side, so I don't know. Was it easy for the artist to listen and understand what you were saying and actually take that knowledge on board?
Well, it was an easier process because you know, Beyonce, Kelly lived with us.
Okay.
Solange uh, wrote, most people aren't aware, Solange wrote a number of hit songs for Destiny Child and Beyonce. She's a
Wow.
prolific songwriter. But if you're living in a household where your dad, think about it, you're living in a household, your dad is the #1 sales rep in the world, and your mom makes $1 million with the top hair salon in the world, you're gonna learn a lot about business, right? So they had the opportunity that most artists don't have, and to grow up in a family that entrepreneurship, and so you learn just by being in the family and just listening as a kid at the dinner table, parents talking about their day and sharing that, sharing the successes, but we also shared the failures.
Wow.
Because we always wanted our kids, and even when I teach and even when I speak, I also talk about the failures, because failures are always, and mistakes,
Yeah.
are opportunities to grow, not a reason to
Yeah.
quit, right?
Why did you decide not to have? Because back in the late mid-90s, we did have people like Mary J. Blige, Tony Braxton. So we had very successful female artists. Brandy, you mentioned earlier. Why did you decide to come up with a group instead of just having, Beyonce on her own and Solange and just having them as solo artists?
Because I didn't start out managing Beyonce.
Oh,
Beyonce started out in a girls group called Girls Time. And she was in that group for 2 years before I even got involved. All I did is drop her off at practice and pick her up at practice. I'm the #1 sales rep at Xerox. I got a
so you
medical
should
system.
have.
I'm not thinking about a girl group. I'm thinking about my next deal.
Yeah.
It was only until earlier I talked about failure and mistakes, the opportunity to grow. It was only when they lost on Star Search that it got my attention, that a change needed to happen. And then I transitioned, went back to school and stuff. And at the same time, what was happening for me personally was managed care in the medical field. And I knew I didn't want to do that anymore after 20 years, and transitioned and got the record deal for Lil O at MCA. And then full time got into the music industry. And once in the music industry, then we got into the apparel industry with House of Darion and Darion. Didn't know anything about apparel, but again, used the skills I had learned before.
Yeah.
Learn those fundamental skills. And that's why if anybody wants to be in a business side of music, if you're not taking classes and learning terminology, understanding the culture of the music industry, you're probably going to fail that. You just can't one day show up in a new industry. You've got to put in the work.
Yeah.
And you're there in London. I work with 2 London-based schools. I work with LCCM. I'm on the advisory board. I'll be teaching there in the next months. And I work with Point Blank Music School, both based right there in London. And Point Blank, in a month, I'll be my next class, Fundamentals of the Music Industry in a Digital Age, which will be online. So people listening, all they have to do is go online at Point Blank Music School and see the class.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll be sure to make sure that all this is detailed so that because we do get a mixture of those who are fans of the music industry, and then you have others who actually are thinking about how to succeed. But then we get so much of the horror stories that we almost think that you lose before you even start off, and I think that sense of knowledge and learning and understanding.
But
But
let
not,
me stop
yeah,
you there, because you made a very valid point. If I open an ice cream shop if I don't understand how ice cream is made and how to sell ice cream, the equipment that I need to, then I'm gonna lose before I start because I don't have the knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And what probably happened one day, I walked in and all the ice cream is melted because I didn't know how to refrigerate.
Yeah.
I mean, in anything we do to be really accomplished and great at it, you have to have the knowledge. It's just not a music thing. This is a life thing.
Yeah. Did you find then that the most successful, and I do wonder then, how did you manage, how much did you get involved when it comes to getting the right type of producers and writers for the group? Because it was very competitive in the 90s with different groups and labels and airplay. So the fact that you came from the business side, so we're looking at the creative side, how much of that did you get involved in the, to really
Well,
help
the one
shape?
thing, the one thing we haven't talked about here, and I'm just checking to see because I have another
Okay.
scheduled Zoom call. I want to stay on here. Yeah, I have about 3 minutes here. One of the things we haven't touched on and talked about is you made it a comment on it, talent. Um, Beyonce was given amazing gift, and she's extremely passionate to this day about her craft. Now, you ask, how did I get these producers? Anybody that's ever listened to Beyonce or saw her perform knew early on one day she would be a star if she continued to develop and work at it. So it wasn't hard to get producers. I mean, these guys are looking for the next big thing, send them a tape, and they were like, oh, okay, yeah, I want to work with that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I definitely appreciate the time. I know that you've got quite a bit going on. I think it's been really fascinating, educational, just the knowledge you've dropped about, learning the vision, putting in the work, because that's is going to be really key, and also not making excuses and not letting your past or anything sort of hold you back. I mean, I'm a I'm a psychotherapist, working with on the 19s here in the UK, and a lot of times when work with young people who are struggling with what has happened in the past or their parents, and they blame that and think, well, what's the point of living and stuff? And so you have to sort of help them refocus and reshape their vision and look forward and have a purpose. And hearing your sort of story and having, if anyone has an excuse to say, well, look at where I came from the South and look at how we didn't have money, and use that as an excuse, but you didn't. You used that almost as fuel to say, what, there's nothing that I can't accomplish. And people will say, well, what's the evidence he did that? Not only your success, but when you look at the success of your children and your family, it's also evidence that if you just continue to breathe that's something, positivity and hard work and ethic, that's something that can really take us to that next step. So I really
Well,
appreciate
I thank you for working. I thank you for working the work that you do. It's important work. I know we always talk about health and wellness, but we always have a reluctance, and hopefully that's changing. I'm seeing it change to talk about mental health and the
Yeah.
importance of mental health. And we all, including myself, have struggles. I've spent 10 years going to therapists to talk about the traumas that I had in my childhood that affected me in my adult years. But getting a grasp and understanding that, again, I would say it over and over, knowledge is power. And getting that knowledge of understanding the triggers and the challenges of life. So I thank you for what you do, sir.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And in fact, I just remembered that you mentioned therapy, and I know that's something, as men, especially Black men, that's something that we sort of run away from and think, now I'll talk to my guy or talk to the pastor and not seek professional help. So I just hope that's an awareness that we can continue to spread, especially for Black men, to talk?
Well, thank you. My assistant is calling me as we speak.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
And, you know, for those that want to find out more about what I'm doing or book me to speak at an engagement, which I enjoy doing, just simply go to my name, MathewKnowles.com. You can find out where I'm teaching, where I'm speaking, if you'd like for me to speak, or any other information. So again, thank you for this time and have a wonderful day.
Will do. Thanks for watching. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, but most importantly, to press the notification bell so that you can be notified when we do have a new interview. Loads to come, but thanks a lot for watching.